Today I will explain everything about the Black Death. But before that, let me know when and where are you watching this video from. Now, let's begin. The year is 1346. The world does not know it yet, but it is already standing on the edge of a disaster so vast that it will reshape history forever. Life moves slowly across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Most people are farmers. They wake with the sun, work the soil, and pray at night. Towns are small, crowded, and dirty. Streets are narrow. Waste is thrown outside doors. Rats move freely through homes, markets, and ships. No one pays them much attention. They are just part of life. Trade routes stretch across continents like thin veins. Silk, spices, grain, and gold travel from China to the Mediterranean. Merchants cross deserts and seas, stopping at busy ports and walled cities. These routes bring wealth, ideas, and culture, but they also carry something else, something unseen, something deadly. Far to the east, in Central Asia, strange deaths begin to appear. People fall ill suddenly. They develop fever, chills, and deep exhaustion. Painful swellings rise in their groins, armpits, and necks. These lumps grow dark and hard. Some burst. Many die within days. Families pray. Healers apply herbs. Nothing works. The sickness spreads quietly, following caravans, moving from town to town like a shadow. No one understands what is happening. There are no microscopes, no knowledge of bacteria. People believe disease comes from bad air, divine punishment, or the movement of the stars. When someone dies, the body is buried quickly. When many die, graves are dug faster. When too many die, bodies are left where they fall. By 1347, the sickness reaches the Black Sea. In the trading city of Kaffa, merchants from Italy watch in horror as something terrible unfolds outside their walls. The city is under siege. Mongol forces camp beyond the gates. Then the attackers begin to die. One by one, their bodies swell and darken. Panic spreads through the camp. In desperation, the attackers do something unthinkable. They load the dead bodies onto catapults and hurl them over the city walls. Inside Kaffa, the disease explodes. People fall sick overnight. Streets fill with cries. Homes become death traps. Merchants flee to their ships, believing the sea will save them. They do not know the enemy is already with them. Rats hide in the cargo. Fleas cling to fur and fabric. The ships sail west, carrying spices, silk, and death. When the ships arrive in Sicily, the sailors are barely alive. Many collapse on the docks. Black swellings cover their bodies. The smell of death follows them. Authorities order the ships away, but it is too late. The disease slips into the city like smoke through a crack. From there, it moves fast. Messina, Genoa, Venice, Marseille. Each port welcomes trade and unknowingly welcomes the plague. Bells ring constantly for the dead. Priests walk from house to house, giving last prayers. Families lock themselves inside, hoping to wait it out. Others flee to the countryside, spreading the sickness further. By 1348, the Black Death is everywhere. It tears through cities with terrifying speed. In Florence, half the population dies. In Paris, graves overflow. In London, carts roll through the streets calling for the dead to be brought out. The rich die in their mansions. The poor die in their shacks. Kings, priests, merchants, children death does not choose. Doctors are helpless. They wear long robes and strange masks filled with herbs, believing sweet smells will protect them. They bleed patients, burn incense, and study the stars. Nothing stops the disease. Some doctors flee. Others die trying. People search for meaning. Many believe God is angry. Groups of flagellants march through towns, whipping themselves in public, begging for forgiveness. Others look for someone to blame. Jews are accused of poisoning wells. Violence follows. Communities are destroyed not by disease, but by fear. The world begins to feel unreal. Fields go unplanted. Shops close. Entire villages vanish. Wolves wander into empty towns. Churches are silent except for funerals. Children grow up without parents. Parents bury children with their own hands. Time loses meaning as days blur together in grief. And yet, the plague does not move evenly. Some places are spared for reasons no one understands. One town dies while another survives. Hope flickers, then disappears again as the sickness returns. By the end of the first wave, tens of millions are dead. Perhaps 1/3 of Europe is gone. In some regions, half the people have vanished. The land is the same, but the world feels hollow, broken, and haunted. People begin to ask dangerous questions. Why did God allow this? Why did the church fail to protect them? Why did the old rules not save anyone? These questions will change society forever. But for now, survival is the only goal. As the bodies are buried and the bells finally fall silent, many believe the nightmare is over. They are wrong. The Black Death has not finished its work. It will return again and again, reshaping power, faith, labor, and the very way humans see life and death. And as the survivors look at the empty streets and abandoned homes, a new and uncertain world begins to rise from the ashes, leading us into what comes next. When the first wave of death finally slows, the world does not feel saved. It feels stunned. Like a battlefield after the fighting ends, silence hangs heavy in the air. Bells no longer ring every hour, but the echo of them still lives in people's minds. Survivors walk through streets that feel too wide now because so many are gone. Doors remain shut. Homes sit empty. Grass grows between stones where thousands once walked every day. In cities, the smell of death lingers long after the bodies are buried. Mass graves stretch beyond churchyards, Priests can no longer remember the names of the dead they prayed over. Some stopped keeping records altogether. There were simply too many. In many towns, half the clergy are gone. In some places, almost all of them. People expected life to return to normal once the sickness passed. But normal no longer exists. Farmers look across their fields and realize there are not enough hands to work the land. Entire families have disappeared. Oxen stand idle. Tools rust. Crops rot where they were never harvested. Hunger follows closely behind the plague, like a second shadow. Even those who survived the disease now face starvation. In the cities, workshops are silent. Bakers, blacksmiths, tailors, masons, many are dead. Apprentices are gone. Masters are buried. Goods become scarce. Prices rise sharply. A loaf of bread that once cost a coin now costs several. The poor suffer the most, as always. But something strange begins to happen. For those who are still alive, their labor suddenly matters more than ever before. Lords and landowners desperately need workers. Fields must be planted, roads repaired, houses rebuilt. For the first time in generations, peasants realize they have power. Before the plague, most peasants were tied to the land. They worked for their lord, owed heavy taxes, and had little choice. Now they can leave. They can demand better wages. Some refuse to work unless they are paid more or treated better. Landowners are furious. They try to pass laws forcing wages down, trying to return life to how it was. But the world has shifted. In England, laws are written to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. They fail. Workers simply move elsewhere. In France and Italy, similar laws appear, and similar resistance follows. For the first time, the lower classes begin to push back, quietly but firmly. The seeds of future revolts are planted in this moment of desperation. Meanwhile, fear never truly leaves. People know the plague can return, and it does. Every cough becomes suspicious. Every fever sparks panic. Mothers watch their children with terror in their eyes. A single death can send an entire village into lockdown. Doors are marked. Houses are sealed. Families are trapped inside with the sick, forced to wait and pray. Doctors still do not understand the disease. They argue among themselves. Some claim it comes from poisoned air. Others blame planetary alignments. Many still believe it is God's punishment. Few question the rats. Fewer still notice the fleas. Religion, once a source of comfort, now feels uncertain. People prayed during the plague. They attended Mass. They confessed their sins. They donated money to the church. And still they died. This shakes faith deeply. Some become more religious than ever, clinging tightly to God. Others turn away completely, feeling abandoned. The church itself is weakened. Many priests fled during the worst days. Others demanded payment for prayers. Corruption becomes harder to ignore. People remember who stayed to help the sick and who ran. Art and writing begin to change. Stories grow darker. Paintings fill with images of skeletons, decay, and death. The dance of death appears in murals, kings and peasants dancing together toward the grave, equal at last. Writers speak openly about fear, suffering, and the fragile nature of life. Death is no longer a distant idea. It is personal, intimate, always near. Children grow up surrounded by loss. Many are raised by relatives or strangers. Some inherit land or wealth unexpectedly because entire families above them are gone. A poor boy can suddenly become a landowner. A nobody can become important overnight. Old social rules begin to blur. The plague also leaves deep psychological scars. People who survived often feel guilt. Why did they live when others died? Nightmares are common. Some hear bells that no longer ring. Others avoid crowds forever. Laughter feels wrong. Joy feels temporary. Life feels fragile, like glass. And then, just when people start to believe they can rebuild, the plague returns. A new outbreak appears. Then another. And another. The Black Death does not strike once and leave. It comes in waves, haunting Europe for centuries. Each time, fewer die than before, but the fear is just as strong. The memory of the first devastation never fades. Communities develop strange habits. Some towns close their gates at the first rumor of sickness. Others isolate travelers. Quarantines become common. The word itself comes from 40 days. The time ships are forced to wait before unloading. People are learning slowly, painfully, through suffering. Yet even as death continues to visit, life stubbornly pushes forward. Marriages happen quickly. People no longer wait. Tomorrow is not promised. Feasts return, louder and more colorful than before. Fashion becomes bold. Music fills taverns again. It is as if people are daring death to take them while they are alive. This tension between fear and hunger for life defines the post-plague world. And beneath all of this, something even bigger is changing. Power is shifting. Old systems are cracking. New ideas are quietly forming in the minds of survivors who have seen the world end once already. The Black Death did not just kill millions. It shattered the old order. And as society struggles to stand again, new conflicts, rebellions, and transformations are waiting just ahead, ready to reshape history in ways no one yet understands. As the decades pass after the first great wave of the Black Death, the world does not return to what it was. Instead, it limps forward, scarred and altered. People carry the memory of death with them, like a shadow that never fully disappears. Even children who were born after the worst years grow up hearing the stories told in whispers by parents and grandparents who survived when so many did not. Every town has its haunted places, There is the abandoned house at the edge of the village, where an entire family died in a single week. There is the empty field that once held rows of homes. There is the church wall covered in names scratched by grieving hands. These places become part of everyday life, silent reminders that death can return at any moment. The plague comes back again, not with the same sudden fury as before, but with cruel persistence. A flare-up here, another there. Sometimes years pass in peace, and then the sickness returns without warning. People learn to live with constant uncertainty. They watch the skies. They listen for rumors. They scan faces for signs of fever. Communities become suspicious. Strangers are no longer welcomed easily. Travelers are questioned, isolated, or turned away entirely. Ships are held at sea for weeks. Goods are fumigated with smoke. Letters are handled with fear. Even friendship becomes risky. To embrace someone is to gamble with your life. Fear changes how people treat one another. In some places, neighbors support each other more than ever before, sharing food, caring for orphans, and rebuilding together. In others, fear turns people cold. The sick are abandoned. Families are locked inside their homes and left to die alone. Survival becomes personal. Governments begin to respond. City leaders start keeping records of deaths. Health boards are formed. Quarantine laws are enforced more strictly. Watchmen guard infected houses. Flags are raised to warn others away. This is the beginning of public health, not from knowledge, but from terror and experience. Still, understanding remains limited. Many continue to believe the plague is carried by bad air. Cities build wide streets to let fresh air flow. Fires are lit constantly to cleanse the atmosphere. Perfumes and herbs are worn everywhere. Doctors still avoid touching patients, using long sticks to point at swollen bodies. The real cause remains invisible. Rats scurry through markets, docks, and homes, unnoticed. Fleas jump quietly from animal to human. The smallest creatures carry the greatest destruction, but no one knows it yet. The enemy is hidden, and that makes it even more terrifying. Meanwhile, the social world continues to shift. With fewer workers available, survivors gain opportunities their ancestors never had. Peasants move to cities. Laborers demand contracts. Women take on roles once reserved for men, running businesses, farms, and workshops after their husbands die. Some societies resist this change, but reality forces adaptation. The old feudal order weakens. Lords who once held absolute control now struggle to maintain it. Their lands are empty. Their income shrinks. They cannot rule without people. Power begins slowly to tilt downward. This change creates tension. Uprisings erupt. In England, peasants rebel against unfair laws and taxes. In France, unrest grows. In Italy, workers organize. These rebellions are not just about money. They are fueled by memory. People remember how easily life can be taken. They are no longer willing to suffer quietly. The plague has stripped away illusions. People have seen kings die like beggars. They have watched priests fail. They have learned that status does not protect against death. This knowledge cannot be undone. Religion continues to transform. Some movements grow extreme. New sects form, claiming special insight into God's will. Others preach that the end of the world is near. Apocalyptic thinking spreads. Heaven and hell feel closer than ever. At the same time, skepticism grows. People question authority. They ask why suffering exists. They ask why innocent children died. These questions slowly open the door to new ways of thinking, ways that will later explode into major intellectual movements. Art becomes more honest. Artists no longer paint only saints and angels. They paint suffering. They paint decay. They paint ordinary people. Death appears everywhere in poems, songs, carvings, and stories. But so does life. Love feels more urgent. Beauty feels more fragile. Writers begin to focus on the human experience. They write about fear, desire, loneliness, and survival. Stories are told not just to entertain, but to process trauma. Laughter becomes a form of rebellion against despair. Medicine, too, begins to shift. Though still deeply flawed, some doctors start to rely less on ancient texts and more on observation. They note patterns. They compare outbreaks. They argue fiercely. But the idea that knowledge can grow begins to take hold. Survivors become witnesses. They tell younger generations what happened. They warn them not to take peace for granted. They describe the silence of empty towns, the smell of death, the weight of constant funerals. These stories shape culture long after the bodies are gone. Yet, despite all this change, the plague refuses to release its grip. It lingers like a curse, returning every few decades, sometimes every few years. It becomes part of life's rhythm. People plan weddings knowing a funeral might follow. Children learn early that tomorrow is uncertain. And still, humanity adapts. Markets reopen. Universities expand. Trade resumes. Exploration increases. There is a hunger to move forward, to build, to understand. The same disaster that shattered the old world has cracked it open, allowing new ideas to grow through the ruins. But the cost of this transformation is written in bones beneath the soil of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Millions of silent witnesses to a catastrophe that reshaped everything. And as these slow changes continue to ripple outward, another question begins to rise in the minds of thinkers and rulers alike. Could this ever happen again on such a scale? And if so, could humanity ever be ready for it? That question will guide the next chapter of this long and uneasy story. As time moves forward, the memory of the Black Death does not fade. It hardens. It settles deep into the bones of society. People no longer speak of the plague as a single event. They speak of it as something that belongs to the world now, like war or famine. It is not a visitor anymore. It is a presence. Children grow up learning the signs. A sudden fever, a painful swelling, dark spots on the skin. Mothers teach daughters what to watch for. Fathers warn sons never to ignore sickness. Bells, once symbols of prayer and celebration, now carry a darker meaning. When they ring too often, people count the sounds and wonder who is next. Cities begin to change their shape. Streets are widened, not for beauty, but for air. Waste rules are introduced, though poorly enforced. Markets are pushed farther apart. Burial grounds are moved outside city walls. These changes are small and imperfect, but they mark something new. Fear is shaping architecture. In ports, the mood is tense. Ships are both lifelines and threats. They bring grain, timber, cloth, and wealth. They also bring rumors of sickness. Harbor officials inspect crews, sometimes from a distance. Sailors are questioned. Sick men are left behind. Some ships are turned away entirely, forced to drift until either health returns or everyone aboard is dead. Quarantine becomes routine. 40 days, waiting, watching, hoping. Crews pass the time praying, drinking, arguing, and staring at the shore they cannot touch. Some survive, some do not. Bodies are quietly thrown into the sea at night. Fear becomes law. In many cities, officials gain new powers. They can lock houses, burn belongings, isolate families. Guards are paid to enforce these rules. Sometimes they help. Sometimes they abuse their power. The line between protection and cruelty grows thin. Inside locked homes, life becomes unbearable. Families share small rooms with the sick. Food runs out. Air grows stale. Some pray. Some scream. Some try to escape through windows. Those caught fleeing are punished harshly, not because they are evil, but because they are afraid. The plague turns neighbors into watchers. People spy on each other. A cough is reported. A fever is whispered about. Accusations spread quickly. Trust erodes. Survival becomes a lonely thing. Yet in the darkness, there are moments of courage. Some doctors stay when others flee. Some priests continue to visit the dying, knowing it may cost them their lives. Some neighbors secretly leave food at locked doors. These small acts of humanity shine brightly against the surrounding fear. But they are rare. The truth is brutal. When death feels random, compassion becomes dangerous. Economies struggle to stabilize. With fewer people, demand shifts. Some goods become cheap. Others become impossibly expensive. Land changes hands often, sometimes without clear ownership. Records were lost. Families died without heirs. Disputes fill courts that barely function. Money itself begins to feel strange. Some inherit wealth they never expected. Others lose everything overnight. Gold cannot cure disease. Rich men die just as quickly as beggars. This reality shakes long-held beliefs about power and security. The noble classes feel threatened. Their authority was built on numbers, workers, soldiers, tenants. Now those numbers are gone. To maintain control, they tighten laws, increase punishments, and try to freeze society in place. But the world refuses to obey. People have seen too much. They have seen castles fall silent. They have seen priests collapse beside peasants. They have buried too many to believe in old promises. Obedience weakens. Resistance grows, quietly at first, then openly. In the countryside, abandoned villages dot the landscape. Roofs collapse. Wells dry up. Churches stand empty, their bells rusting. Nature begins to reclaim what humans left behind. Forests creep outward. Animals move into places once full of life. Travelers describe these lands with fear. They speak of ghost towns where no smoke rises and no voices answer. They say the dead walk at night, though it is only wind and memory playing tricks on broken minds. The plague also reshapes family life. Marriage becomes urgent. People wed quickly, sometimes without love, simply to avoid being alone. Children are valued deeply, not just for labor, but for survival. To lose a child feels like losing the future itself. At the same time, life feels cheaper. When death is everywhere, risks feel smaller. Drinking increases. Gambling spreads. Violence rises in some regions. People chase pleasure with a hunger born from trauma. Tomorrow is uncertain, so today must be lived fully. Art reflects this contradiction. Images of death appear alongside images of celebration. Skeletons dance in murals while musicians play. Pain and joy exist side by side. This is not confusion. It is adaptation. Education begins to change quietly. Universities reopen with new energy. Students question old teachings. They debate causes of disease, nature, and the human body. Though answers are wrong, the desire to question is new and powerful. The Black Death has cracked the foundation of certainty. For centuries, people trusted tradition, authority, and ancient knowledge. Now those things feel fragile. If they could not explain or stop the plague, what else might they be wrong about? This thought is dangerous. It spreads slowly, like a second invisible infection. It encourages curiosity. It invites doubt. It plants the earliest seeds of a new age, though no one calls it that yet. Still, the plague remains. Another outbreak hits, then another. Each one reopens wounds. Each one reminds survivors that the nightmare is not finished. The past never feels safely behind them, and somewhere, beyond the familiar towns and borders, trade routes still stretch across the world. Ships still sail. Caravans still move. The same paths that once carried death continue to connect humanity in ways it does not yet fully understand, as people struggle to rebuild their lives, unaware of what future centuries will call this era. The Black Death continues to shape not just bodies, but minds, beliefs, and destinies. And as fear slowly transforms into something else, something closer to awareness, the story begins to shift again, leading into a chapter where humanity starts, for the first time, to truly observe the enemy that nearly destroyed it. By the middle of the 14th century, the Black Death is no longer a mystery wrapped in sudden terror. It has become something far worse, a familiar horror. People now recognize its rhythm. Long years of uneasy calm are followed by sudden explosions of sickness. Each time, panic returns just as strong as before. Memory offers no protection. Knowing what is coming does not soften the blow. When the plague comes again, it does not announce itself loudly. It begins quietly. A single death, then another. A rumor spreads through a marketplace. Someone whispers that a child has a fever. A merchant fails to open his shop. The air feels heavier, even though nothing has changed. People start counting days. They remember how it began last time. Fear moves faster than disease. Families pull their children indoors. Taverns empty. Churches fill, then empty again when people fear crowds more than hell. Travel slows. Trade hesitates. Entire cities hold their breath. Authorities react faster now. They have learned through pain. Gates are guarded. Travelers are stopped. Houses with the sick are sealed with marks painted on the doors. Guards are posted to keep people inside. Food is delivered if possible. Often, it is not enough. Inside these homes, time breaks down. Days blur together in darkness and silence. The sick groan. The healthy listen, unable to sleep. They argue, pray, beg, and curse. Sometimes the disease spares them. Sometimes it takes everyone. When the door is finally opened, either survivors step out blinking into the light, or guards find only bodies. The sound of carts returns. Wooden wheels creak through narrow streets as men collect the dead. Bodies are wrapped in cloth if there is time. Often there is not. Graves are dug quickly, sometimes reopened to make space. In desperate moments, bodies are stacked like firewood. Death becomes routine. This is perhaps the most terrible change of all. People stop reacting with shock. They react with exhaustion. Tears dry up. Grief becomes heavy and quiet. Life continues, not because people are hopeful, but because stopping feels pointless. Children play near graves. They do not remember a world without plague. For them, death is part of the landscape. This changes how they grow, how they think, how they love. Innocence fades early. The survivors carry deep scars. Many suffer from lasting weakness. Others develop strange fears. Some refuse to touch anyone. Some refuse to sleep alone. Some laugh too loudly, too often, as if trying to drown out memory. The mind is wounded as deeply as the body. Communities fracture under pressure. Old friendships dissolve. Accusations spread. Someone must be blamed. If not God, then neighbors. If not neighbors, then outsiders. Violence erupts again and again against minorities, against the poor, against anyone different enough to fear. The plague does not create hatred, but it gives it permission. At the same time, moments of remarkable kindness still appear. Strangers nurse the dying. Orphans are taken in. Food is shared even when it is scarce. These acts are not grand or recorded in history books, but they matter deeply. They are proof that fear does not erase humanity completely. Medical knowledge inches forward, painfully slow. Some doctors begin to notice patterns. They see that those who handle the sick die more often. They observe that outbreaks follow trade routes. They argue that isolation helps, even if they do not know why. These ideas face resistance, but they do not disappear. Experience becomes a teacher when theory fails. Hospitals evolve. They are no longer just places of prayer. Some begin separating patients. Some improve cleanliness, though the reason is unclear. These changes are crude, inconsistent, and often accidental, but they save lives. Governments grow stronger, but also harsher. Emergency powers become normal. Surveillance increases. Freedom is sacrificed for safety. People accept it because the alternative is chaos. This sets a precedent that will echo far into the future. The relationship between rulers and the ruled changes permanently. Labor shortages continue. Survivors are valuable. Wages rise despite laws meant to stop them. Skilled workers gain status. Mobility increases. A peasant can leave one lord for another. This would have been unthinkable before the plague. The old hierarchy strains and cracks. Women, especially widows, step into new roles. They manage land, run shops, sign contracts. Some gain independence for the first time. Others face suspicion and backlash. Change brings opportunity, but also resistance. Gender roles bend, though they do not break completely. Culture absorbs the trauma. Songs about death and fate spread. Stories warn against pride and greed. Humor becomes darker. Jokes about dying young circulate, not because people are cruel, but because laughter feels like defiance. If death is inevitable, then fear must be mocked. Religion transforms again. Some abandon organized faith entirely. Others cling to personal spirituality. Saints associated with plague gain popularity. People pray not for salvation anymore, but for survival. Faith becomes practical. The idea of time changes. People no longer think in long futures. Plans are short. Promises are fragile. Someday becomes meaningless. Everything is immediate, urgent, now. this mindset reshapes ambition. People chase pleasure, power, love, and meaning with intensity. Art becomes emotional. Literature becomes personal. The human experience takes center stage. The Black Death, without intending to, pushes humanity inward, toward the self, toward observation, toward questioning. Yet still, the plague refuses to vanish. It lingers at the edges of society, waiting. Each generation believes it understands the danger better than the last. Each generation is proven wrong in new ways. And as the world adapts to this constant threat, something remarkable begins to happen. Instead of simply reacting to death, people begin to truly study it, not just spiritually, but physically. A dangerous curiosity awakens. If the plague can be observed, tracked, and perhaps predicted, then maybe, just maybe, it can be controlled. That dangerous idea marks the quiet beginning of a new struggle, one that will push humanity closer to knowledge, but also closer to consequences it cannot yet imagine. By now, the Black Death has woven itself into the rhythm of life. It is no longer remembered only as a single disaster from the past, but as a force that still breathes, still waits, still strikes. Entire generations have grown up under its shadow. Grandparents tell stories of the first great wave. Parents tell stories of later outbreaks. Children listen, knowing that one day they may add their own chapter. The world has learned fear, but fear alone is not enough. Slowly, almost without realizing it, people begin to observe. They notice that the plague does not appear at random. It follows paths. It comes after ships arrive. It rises in crowded cities faster than in open countryside. It spreads where people are packed together, breathing the same air, touching the same walls, sleeping in the same rooms. These observations are quiet. They are not scientific in the modern sense, but they matter. City officials begin writing things down. Dates, numbers, names, how many died, how fast, where it began, where it stopped. These records are incomplete and flawed, but they mark a turning point. Memory is no longer enough. Experience must be preserved. The idea forms slowly. Maybe this horror can be understood. Doctors remain divided. Some cling tightly to ancient theories, convinced that the wisdom of the past must hold the answer. Others grow impatient. They have seen too many die while following old rules. They begin to trust their eyes more than their books. This causes conflict. Arguments spill into universities, courts, and councils. Authority is questioned openly. A doctor who challenges tradition risks ridicule, exile, or worse. But silence now feels more dangerous than rebellion. The human body becomes a focus of curiosity. In secret, some physicians begin examining the dead. Dissections, once forbidden or feared, are attempted quietly. They search for signs inside the body that might explain the sudden collapse, the swelling, the bleeding. They do not find the truth, but they take the first steps toward it. The plague reshapes cities not only physically, but socially. Public health roles emerge. Inspectors check homes. Watchmen patrol streets. Cleaners are hired to remove waste. These jobs are dangerous, poorly paid, and essential. Many who take them know they may die, but someone must do the work. Society begins to rely on organized response. This is new. Before the plague, disasters were seen as acts of God alone. Now, human action enters the equation. People begin to believe that behavior matters, that choices can influence survival. This belief is fragile, but powerful. Quarantine becomes stricter. Ports enforce isolation with greater force. Entire islands are used to hold travelers. Some survive their isolation. Some go mad. Some die quietly, staring at the shore they cannot reach. The sea, once a symbol of freedom and trade, now feels like a barrier between life and death. Fear changes trade itself. Merchants hesitate. Routes shift. Some cities lose importance. Others rise as safer alternatives. Economic power moves slowly but decisively. The map of influence begins to redraw itself. The plague does not just kill, it rearranges the world. In the countryside, landowners face a new reality. They cannot force people to stay. Workers leave freely, seeking better conditions. Some landlords adapt, offering wages and rights. Others cling to violence and punishment. Their lands empty even faster. Rigid power structures begin to rot from within. This decay fuels anger. Rebellions erupt again. Not always large, not always organized, but frequent. Attacks refused here. A law ignored there. A lord attacked in the night. These acts are dangerous, but fear has lost its grip. People who have faced death no longer fear authority the same way. The memory of plague becomes a weapon. If we survived that, people say, we can survive this. Religion struggles to maintain control. The church still holds immense influence, but cracks widen. People notice contradictions. Some priests preach humility while living in comfort. Some demand money for prayers. The plague exposed these flaws brutally. New religious ideas spread quietly. Personal faith grows stronger than institutional loyalty. People pray alone. They speak to God directly. They seek meaning without permission. This inward turn reshapes belief. Art becomes increasingly human. Faces in paintings look tired. Bodies are imperfect. Emotions are raw. Artists no longer pretend that life is orderly or fair. They paint what they see: loss, resilience, and fragile hope. Stories grow longer and more complex. Writers describe plague-stricken cities in painful detail. They write about fear, isolation, and survival. These stories are not just entertainment. They are memory made permanent. The Black Death becomes history while it is still happening. And still, it continues to return. Each outbreak feels slightly different. Some are faster, some are slower, some kill many, some kill fewer. No one understands why. This uncertainty keeps fear alive. People look for patterns in the wrong places. They blame the weather. They blame eclipses. They blame comets. Every strange event becomes suspicious. The sky itself feels dangerous. Yet beneath superstition, reason grows quietly. The idea spreads that cleanliness matters, not perfectly, not consistently, but waste removal improves in some cities. Water sources are protected. Crowded housing is criticized. These ideas are uneven, fragile, and often ignored, but they exist. Seeds have been planted. The plague also changes how people view time and legacy. Before, a man might work his entire life for his children. Now, many have no heirs. Others inherit suddenly. Wealth moves unpredictably. People begin spending more on the present. Architecture reflects this urgency. Buildings are decorated boldly. Homes are rebuilt with comfort in mind. Public spaces are designed to impress and inspire. It is as if people want beauty to stand against death. Hope becomes an act of resistance, but the cost remains heavy. Mental suffering spreads quietly. Depression, fear, and despair haunt survivors. There is no language for trauma yet, but its effects are everywhere. Some withdraw completely. Others become reckless. The plague leaves invisible wounds. As decades pass, one truth becomes clear. The Black Death is not just a disease. It is a turning point. It has weakened old powers, strengthened new ones, and forced humanity to look at itself with brutal honesty. It has shown how small humans are and how adaptable. And now, as curiosity grows and observation sharpens, the next phase begins. People are no longer satisfied with surviving. They want answers, and that hunger for understanding will lead humanity down a path that transforms medicine, science, and society forever, though not without new dangers waiting just ahead. As the years stretch into decades, the Black Death becomes something more than a disease. It becomes a memory that refuses to sleep. It lives in habits, laws, fears, and stories. People no longer ask if it will return. They ask when. Entire communities now organize their lives around that expectation. Markets are designed with space between stalls. Houses are built with more windows. City gates are watched more carefully than ever before. Travel papers become common. A stranger is no longer just a stranger. He is a question mark, a possible threat. Trust, once simple, has become cautious. Yet the world does not freeze. It adapts. Merchants still travel because trade is survival. Farmers still plant because hunger is certain if they do not. Children are still born because life continues even when death waits nearby. Humanity learns to walk forward, while constantly looking over its shoulder. The plague reshapes the idea of community. Before, towns were tightly bound by shared work and shared faith. Now they are bound by shared risk. Decisions are made collectively, not out of unity, but necessity. Who may enter, who must leave, who is isolated, who is cared for. These choices are heavy, and they divide people as often as they protect them. Leaders gain power in moments of crisis. City councils, mayors, and magistrates take control when outbreaks begin. They order closures, enforce quarantines, and ration supplies. Some lead with wisdom. Others lead with cruelty. Their actions are remembered long after the sickness fades. Reputation becomes everything. A city known for strict control is avoided in peacetime, but trusted during outbreaks. A city known for denial or delay suffers heavier losses. Slowly, painfully, political identity becomes tied to public health. This is new. Never before has disease shaped power so directly. The plague also redraws moral boundaries. People debate what is right and wrong in desperate times. Is it acceptable to abandon the sick to save the healthy? Is it just to lock families inside their homes? Is survival more important than compassion? There are no clear answers. Different places choose differently. Some become known for mercy, others for efficiency. Both pay a price. Stories of sacrifice circulate. A doctor who stayed, a priest who refused to leave, a mother who nursed strangers, children after her own died. These stories spread because people need heroes in a world that feels broken. At the same time, stories of betrayal spread just as fast. Guards who extorted families, officials who fled early, neighbors who reported false sickness out of fear or hatred. These memories poison relationships long after the plague passes. Forgiveness becomes difficult. The Black Death changes how people see death itself. Before, death was part of religious ritual, guided by priests and tradition. Now, death often comes alone, without ceremony. Bodies are buried quickly. Prayers are rushed or skipped entirely. This strips death of its meaning, leaving survivors unsettled. People begin to fear not death, but dying unnoticed. This fear influences behavior. People seek witnesses. They want to be remembered. They write wills earlier. They commission paintings, donations, inscriptions. They want proof that they existed. Legacy becomes urgent. This urgency fuels creativity. Art grows bold. Writers experiment. Musicians push boundaries. The desire to leave something behind becomes powerful. The plague, in its cruelty, ignites expression. At the same time, superstition deepens. Talismans are worn. Charms are sold. Strange remedies circulate. Some believe certain colors repel disease. Others swear by rituals passed down from survivors. Hope clings to anything that promises control. Quacks thrive. Fear creates opportunity. Fake cures are sold. Miracle potions promise protection. Desperate people pay with their last coins. Some survive and believe. Others die and are forgotten. Truth is hard to prove when death is everywhere. Education continues to evolve quietly. Universities attract students hungry for answers. Medical lectures grow more crowded. Debates grow more heated. Scholars begin comparing outbreaks across regions, noticing similarities that defy superstition. These discussions are dangerous. Challenging old ideas threatens authority, but silence threatens lives. Slowly, the balance shifts. Curiosity gains ground. The plague also alters warfare. Armies move cautiously. Sieges become risky. Soldiers fear crowded camps more than enemy blades. Commanders delay campaigns when sickness appears. Disease becomes a strategic factor. Death, once external, now comes from within. This reality humbles even the most powerful rulers. Kings die suddenly. Successions collapse. Dynasties weaken. Political stability fractures. A single outbreak can change the fate of a kingdom. The plague becomes a silent political actor. Borders shift not because of conquest, but because of absence. Empty lands invite migration. New settlements form. Old ones vanish. The map changes quietly, without banners or battles. Women continue gaining ground. Widows manage estates. Daughters inherit when sons are gone. Women become healers, caretakers, record keepers. Though often unrecognized, their influence grows. This change unsettles tradition. Some push back violently. Others adapt. History moves forward unevenly, dragged by grief and necessity. Children born into this world grow differently. They are taught caution early. They understand loss before joy. But they are also resilient. They adapt faster. They question more. They do not assume stability. They will shape the future. The plague also changes language. New words appear. Old words gain new meaning. Quarantine, contagion, isolation. Language bends to describe experiences never faced before. Speech itself evolves under pressure. Memory becomes institutional. Cities commission chronicles. Monks write records. Families preserve stories. The Black Death is documented not as myth, but as lived reality. This memory refuses to be erased. As the centuries edge forward, outbreaks grow less devastating, but never harmless. The fear remains sharper than the statistics. One death is enough to awaken old nightmares, and yet something remarkable is happening beneath the fear. People are no longer helpless observers. They act, they plan, they adapt, they debate, they remember. Humanity is changing, not because it wants to, but because it must. And as this slow transformation continues, the question shifts again. No longer just, why does this happen? But what can we do about it? That question, simple and dangerous, will push the world toward discoveries that will one day reveal the true nature of the enemy that haunted generations. But that revelation is still far away. For now, the Black Death remains a dark companion, walking beside humanity as it stumbles forward into an uncertain future. By the time the world reaches the late 14th and early 15th centuries, the Black Death no longer arrives as a shock. It arrives like a remembered nightmare, suddenly becoming real again. People recognize its footsteps. They feel it before they see it. The air in cities seems tense, as if everyone is listening for the same distant sound. The plague has taught humanity patience, but not peace. Life continues, yet it feels fragile. Towns rebuild, walls are repaired, markets grow busy again, but every stone feels temporary. People know how quickly it can all vanish. This knowledge sits quietly behind every celebration, every wedding, every birth. Society now lives in a state of cautious balance. On the surface, there is recovery. Trade routes reopen more confidently. Crafts flourish. Art and architecture reach new heights. But underneath, fear never fully leaves. It waits silent, like a shadow behind a door. Cities become more organized than ever before. Officials plan for outbreaks even when none are happening. Emergency funds are created. Food reserves are stored. Laws are written and rewritten. People argue endlessly about what works and what does not. Experience becomes authority. Those who survived previous outbreaks are listened to more carefully. Old men and women who lived through the worst years are treated like living warning signs. Their words carry weight. Their memories shape decisions. Public health becomes a permanent concern. Inspectors roam streets, checking for waste, overcrowding, and sickness. Their presence is not always welcomed. Some see them as protectors. Others see them as spies. Tension simmers constantly. Fear of exposure becomes fear of control. When sickness appears, entire neighborhoods are sealed off. The healthy resent the sick. The sick resent being imprisoned. Arguments erupt. Violence sometimes follows. The plague divides even as it threatens everyone equally. Inside quarantined zones, life shrinks. People measure time by meals, prayers, and the sound of footsteps outside. They listen for news. They listen for death. Some survive long enough to be released. Others never see the streets again. The silence inside these homes is heavy. It presses against the mind. It distorts time. People talk to walls. They whisper to the dead. They dream of crowds and wake up crying. Mental suffering spreads quietly. There are no words for trauma yet, but it is everywhere. Survivors carry invisible wounds. They flinch at bells. They fear touch. Some cannot sleep without light. Others cannot sleep at all. Society learns to hide pain behind routine. Festivals return, but they They feel forced at first. Music plays louder than necessary. Laughter feels sharp, almost aggressive. People celebrate not because they are happy, but because silence reminds them of funerals. Joy becomes an act of defiance. The plague also reshapes time itself. Before, people thought in terms of generations. Now, they think in seasons, in years, in weeks. Plans are short. Promises are fragile. Everything feels provisional. This changes ambition. People chase opportunity faster. They take risks. They travel. They invest. They love fiercely. They marry quickly. Life is no longer something to delay. Death has made time precious. Education grows in strange ways. Universities attract students not just seeking knowledge, but certainty. They want answers. They want rules that work. Medical schools expand, even though their understanding is still deeply flawed. Observation begins to matter more than belief. Scholars compare notes across cities. They argue about why some places suffer more than others. They question why isolation sometimes helps. They write letters, spreading ideas faster than ever before. Knowledge begins to travel like trade once did. This exchange is slow, fragile, and often wrong, but it is relentless. The plague also alters how people view nature. Before, nature was seen as God's orderly creation. Now, it feels unpredictable, dangerous. Animals are feared. Rats, especially, are hated, though their true role is still unknown. Pest control becomes a priority. Cities attempt to reduce vermin. They fail often, but the effort matters. The idea that environment influences health grows stronger. Medicine remains trapped between progress and superstition. Doctors still bleed patients. They still prescribe useless remedies, but they also begin to reject some old practices. They admit uncertainty. This honesty, rare before, changes the profession. Not knowing becomes acceptable. This humility opens doors. The plague reshapes family bonds again. Survivors form smaller households. Extended families become rare. Loss has taught people not to rely on numbers. Emotional bonds grow stronger, even as trust becomes harder. Love becomes intense and fragile. Children are cherished deeply, yet parents fear loving too openly. Attachment feels dangerous when death can strike without warning. Faith continues to fracture and reform. Some churches lose followers. Others grow stronger. New religious movements emerge, promising protection, purity, or truth. Some are peaceful. Others become violent. Spiritual hunger grows in uncertain times. The plague fuels both devotion and doubt. Politically, rulers adapt. Kings and city leaders learn that ignoring disease weakens authority. Those who act decisively gain loyalty. Those who hesitate lose trust. Power becomes linked to protection, not just tradition. This redefines leadership. People expect action, not prayer alone. The plague also shapes memory culture. Monuments are built, memorials rise, names are carved into stone. Death becomes something to remember, not just endure. History becomes personal. These records ensure that the Black Death is never forgotten, even as generations pass. Yet despite all adaptation, the plague continues to return. Smaller outbreaks still kill thousands. Entire towns still suffer. Fear remains justified. The difference now is response. Humanity is no longer frozen by terror. It moves, argues, plans, and reacts. It does not win, but it resists. This resistance changes identity. People begin to see themselves not just as victims of fate, but as participants in survival. This belief is fragile, often wrong but powerful. It drives experimentation. It drives risk. It drives progress. And as centuries approach their turning point, something revolutionary begins to form beneath the surface. A slow realization that the world operates by rules that can be studied, not just feared. This realization will not kill the plague immediately, but it will change everything. Because once humans believe an enemy can be understood, they will never stop trying to master it. And that belief carries humanity into the next chapter of this long struggle, where curiosity begins to challenge terror more openly than ever before. As the late medieval world slowly pushes forward, the Black Death becomes less like a sudden storm and more like a long, bitter season that never fully ends. People no longer live in constant panic, but neither do they feel safe. The plague has trained them to exist in a permanent state of readiness, always watching, always remembering. A strange calm settles over society. It is not peace, it is acceptance. People accept that death can arrive without warning. They accept that prayers may fail. They accept that authorities may make cruel choices in the name of survival. This acceptance hardens them, but it also sharpens their minds. The plague has forced humanity to think. Cities now carry the weight of experience. They are cleaner than before, though still far from safe. Waste is removed more regularly. Water sources are guarded. Crowded housing is criticized, even if it cannot always be fixed. These efforts are uneven, fragile, and often undone by poverty, but they represent intent. Intent did not exist before. Hospitals continue to change. Once little more than shelters for the dying, some begin to resemble places of care. Patients are separated. Bedding is changed more often. Airflow is considered important. None of this is based on true understanding, but trial and error begins to shape practice. Some people survive who would have died before. These small victories matter deeply. Doctors grow more confident, though still divided. Younger physicians are more willing to challenge tradition. They compare outbreaks. They write treatises. They argue that observation must come before belief. This angers older scholars, but the world has changed. Authority without results no longer commands the same respect. Failure has weakened arrogance. The plague also changes how knowledge spreads. Letters travel faster. Books are copied more often. Ideas move across borders. A practice that works in one city is discussed in another. This network of shared experience grows slowly, but it never stops. Information becomes a tool of survival. The Black Death reshapes class identity further. The old divide between noble and peasant still exists, but it is no longer absolute. Wealth shifts hands frequently. Talent matters more. Skill matters more. Survival itself becomes a qualification. This unsettles elites deeply. Some adapt, investing in trade, learning, and governance. Others cling to violence and repression. History remembers both. Laborers continue to demand dignity. They remember how indispensable they became. Even when wages fall again, the memory remains. The idea that power flows only from above no longer feels true. This belief will not fade. Women's roles expand further, quietly but persistently. They run businesses, manage estates, act as healers and midwives. They preserve family memory. Though often excluded from official records, their influence grows inside households and communities. The plague has broken many rules, and not all of them can be rebuilt. Culturally, death remains everywhere, but it is no longer paralyzing. People speak of it openly. They joke about it. They include it in art and music. Skeletons appear not just as warnings, but as companions in storytelling. Death is familiar now. This familiarity changes fear. Instead of running from the idea of death, people begin to shape their lives around it. They seek meaning, intensity, and expression. They refuse to be silent. Literature grows richer. Writers explore inner thoughts, emotions, and contradictions. Characters are flawed. Stories are complex. The human mind becomes a subject worth examining. The plague, unintentionally, has made humanity more self-aware. Religion continues to evolve under pressure. Formal institutions lose some control, but spirituality does not disappear. Instead, it becomes personal. People pray differently. They interpret faith individually. God feels closer and more distant at the same time. This paradox fuels debate. Some see the plague as punishment. Others see it as a test. Some see it as random suffering. These conflicting views coexist uneasily. Doubt becomes normal. Political systems adapt further. Rulers understand now that legitimacy depends on protection. They invest in infrastructure, food security, and emergency response. Failure during outbreaks leads to unrest, rebellion, or removal. Disease becomes a political issue. This connection will never disappear. The plague also reshapes how people think about borders. outbreaks do not respect kingdoms. They cross walls and rivers easily. This forces cooperation between regions, even enemies. Information is exchanged. Borders open and close unpredictably. The idea of shared vulnerability begins to form. Humanity slowly starts to recognize itself as connected. Yet, despite all progress, the Black Death never truly leaves. It fades, returns, mutates, and strikes again. Each outbreak is smaller than the first, but none are harmless. Cities still empty. Families still break. Fear still resurfaces. Memory remains sharp. People tell stories not just of death, but of survival. These stories become lessons, warnings, guides. A culture shaped by catastrophe emerges. This culture values adaptability, awareness, and resilience. It does not erase cruelty or fear, but it tempers them with experience. And now, as centuries edge closer to profound transformation, something important becomes clear. The plague did not just destroy the old world. It prepared the ground for a new one. By stripping away certainty, it made room for questioning. By exposing weakness, it encouraged strength. By forcing observation, it pushed humanity toward understanding. The Black Death has become part of humanity's foundation. And as the medieval world stands on the threshold of new ideas, new sciences, and new ways of thinking, the shadow of the plague still looms quiet, patient, and watchful, because the final impact of the Black Death is not measured only in deaths. It is measured in how deeply it changed what it means to be human. And that realization leads us into the final chapter of this long and devastating story, where the echoes of the plague reach far beyond its own time, shaping a future no one in the 14th century could have imagined. By the time the 15th century fully unfolds, the Black Death is no longer a mere event. It has become a persistent specter that shapes every aspect of life, memory, and society. Its shadow stretches across decades, embedding itself into the routines, fears, and ambitions of people who have never known a world untouched by it. For the survivors of earlier outbreaks, life has become a fragile balance between survival and understanding. They have learned that death can appear suddenly, without warning, and that prayers, medicine, or authority cannot always stop it. And yet, humanity does not stop. The streets, though still haunted by the echo of morning bells and empty carts, bustle with cautious energy. Markets reopen, with stalls arranged more carefully to avoid crowding. Goods are inspected for cleanliness. Water supplies are guarded, and officials keep watch over the flow of people. Ships still bring trade from distant lands, but travelers are scrutinized, documents demanded, and quarantine enforced rigorously. Cities operate like living machines, each component tuned to protect, as best as possible, against an invisible and relentless enemy. Life, though constantly threatened, insists on continuing. In homes across towns and villages, families have adapted to a new normal. Rooms once crowded now house fewer people, a reflection of both loss and caution. Children grow up hearing the stories of siblings, cousins, and friends who did not survive. They learn from an early age to observe symptoms, to fear contact with the sick, and to respect rules that seemed arbitrary but are matters of survival. Mothers nurse children with vigilance. Fathers warn sons to avoid unnecessary risks, and families organize themselves around both care and control. Yet beneath this cautious structure lies a deep and subtle change in how people view life and death. People no longer live as if tomorrow is guaranteed. They invest in the present. They seek joy and experience with urgency. Weddings happen quickly. Celebrations are intense, and music and laughter fill spaces once dominated by grief. And yet, even in these moments of seeming vitality, the shadow of the plague lurks. A single cough can freeze a market. A fever can empty a street. And whispers of illness ripple faster than the disease itself. Life has become both more precious and more fragile. A tension that courses through every human action. The intellectual landscape begins to shift in response to these experiences. Universities and scholars become focal points for observation and debate. Medical knowledge, though still primitive by modern standards, evolves slowly but deliberately. Physicians record deaths, note symptoms, and compare outbreaks across regions. They argue about causes, sometimes returning to old ideas of miasma or divine punishment, but also exploring new concepts of contagion and isolation. Dissection, once taboo, is attempted by a brave few, driven by necessity and curiosity. Observation begins to outweigh blind adherence to ancient texts. In this, the Black Death does more than kill. It awakens inquiry, forcing humanity to confront the limits of understanding and to begin the slow process of scientific reasoning. Knowledge, once static and authoritative, becomes something to test, question, and refine. This intellectual stir sets the foundation for transformations that will reach far beyond medicine, shaping the ways societies think, govern, and even perceive themselves. Social structures are also irrevocably altered. Labor shortages caused by recurring outbreaks force new relationships between classes. Peasants and workers, once bound tightly by feudal obligations, gain unprecedented leverage. Wages rise, mobility increases, and the traditional hierarchies of power begin to bend, if not entirely break. Landowners must adapt or face economic collapse, while some workers find themselves able to negotiate conditions that would have been unthinkable before. Women, often widowed by plague or empowered by necessity, step into roles that expand their influence. They manage estates, run businesses, care for communities, and act as preservers of knowledge in ways that formal histories rarely record. Children born into this era inherit a world of both fear and resilience, of fragility and agency. They are taught to survive, to observe, and to question, forming the first generations whose lives are defined not just by inherited tradition, but by the lessons of catastrophe. Culturally, the Black Death leaves an indelible imprint. Art becomes more honest, raw, and human. Pain, loss, and death are depicted openly alongside hope, defiance, and joy. Music, literature, and theater reflect the stark realities of existence and the fragile beauty of survival. Humor becomes darker, often morbid, as a way to confront fear. Language itself evolves, incorporating words and concepts born from the shared trauma of disease. Cities commission chronicles, and families preserve letters, diaries, and records of loss, survival, and adaptation. Memory becomes institutionalized, ensuring that the stories of devastation and endurance do not vanish with the dead. Even superstition, though gradually tempered by observation, remains entwined with daily life. Charms, rituals, and symbolic practices offer comfort, reflecting humanity's persistent desire for control in the face of uncontrollable forces. Religion, like society itself, undergoes profound transformation. The Church, once the unchallenged authority over spiritual and moral life, faces scrutiny. Faith remains important, but it becomes more personal. Pilgrimages, prayers, and rituals continue, but individuals begin to interpret divine will for themselves. Saints associated with plague gain prominence, but so do alternative movements that challenge traditional hierarchies. Spirituality becomes both a source of hope and a lens for questioning human authority. Morality is tested daily, to isolate or to care, to survive or to protect. The plague forces communities to wrestle with ethical dilemmas that have no simple answers. And this moral introspection shapes cultural values for generations. Politically, rulers recognize that authority is inseparable from protection. Cities, kingdoms, and empires understand that failure to respond decisively to outbreaks erodes loyalty and destabilizes power. Leaders who invest in infrastructure, food supply, and public health gain legitimacy. Those who ignore or mismanage crises face rebellion, loss of trust, and sometimes deposition. Disease becomes a political actor in its own right, influencing strategy, diplomacy, and governance. Borders are redrawn, not solely through conquest, but through demographic shifts. Trade routes shift in response to outbreaks. Cities rise and fall in prominence, and the very map of human settlement is reshaped. Humanity, once confident in its dominion over nature, learns humility in the face of invisible forces. The psychological impact of the plague cannot be overstated. Trauma, though poorly understood, shapes behavior and thought across generations. Survivors carry invisible scars, manifesting in caution, anxiety, and obsessive care. Some withdraw, haunted by memories. Others pursue life with reckless intensity, as if outrunning the shadow of death itself. Communities learn both resilience and cruelty. They nurture the healthy and punish the vulnerable, sometimes simultaneously. The Black Death teaches lessons that are not easily reconciled with morality or compassion. And yet, it instills adaptability, foresight, and an acute awareness of mortality. As the medieval world transitions into the Renaissance, the imprint of the Black Death continues to guide human thought, culture, and governance. Humanity has learned to measure risk, to value observation over blind faith, and to act collectively in the face of invisible threats. The seeds of modern medicine, public health, economic restructuring, and even scientific inquiry have been sown in the soil of tragedy. Knowledge, observation, and human agency slowly begin to challenge superstition, ignorance, and passive acceptance. Fear remains, but it no longer paralyses. It instructs, motivates, and shapes the trajectory of civilization itself. In the end, the Black Death's true devastation is not counted merely in the tens of millions who died, but in the transformation it forced upon the living. It tore apart families, communities, and empires. Yet it also created a world more aware, more resilient, and more capable of confronting uncertainty. Humanity, scarred and trembling, emerges from the shadow of the plague, changed forever, carrying forward lessons that will echo through centuries. It is a world that has been reminded, again and again, that life is fragile, knowledge is precious, and survival is both a challenge and an art. And in this long, relentless struggle between life and death, the story of the Black Death lingers, shaping every heartbeat, every decision, and every generation that follows, like a silent tutor whispering lessons that are impossible to ignore. This is the world the plague leaves behind, broken, weary, terrified, but also unbowed, curious, and forever transformed, standing at the threshold of an age that will test human ingenuity and resilience in ways the survivors of the 14th century could scarcely imagine. Even as the 15th century wanes, the long shadow of the Black Death refuses to recede. By this time, it has ceased to be only a killer. It has become a teacher, a relentless force that continues to shape human thought, society, and imagination. Generations have now grown up for whom stories of plague are not memories, but warnings, passed down from parents, grandparents, and surviving siblings. Every death, every emptied village, every abandoned street serves as a lesson etched deep into the collective consciousness. Humanity has begun to realize, almost painfully, that the plague is not just a disease to endure. It is a mirror held up to the fragility of life. revealing how easily civilization itself can crumble. It is as if the world has learned to walk with one eye on survival and the other on understanding. A dual vigilance born from repeated catastrophe. In towns and cities across Europe, life moves forward cautiously, but with a wariness that defines its rhythm. Markets bustle, yet the crowd is more measured. Traders space their stalls, clean their goods, and watch travelers with suspicion. Public spaces are maintained with vigilance, not luxury. Every street, every alleyway, every canal and water source is scrutinized. Because the memory of the plague has taught people that death often arrives unnoticed, flowing silently through the air, the water, and the tiniest cracks of human interaction. Families, too, have adapted in ways that are subtle yet profound. Households are smaller, more compartmentalized. Kitchens, sleeping quarters, and common areas are kept orderly not only out of convenience, but out of the grim understanding that disease often spreads through chaos. Children are taught early to observe symptoms, to notice fever, swelling, and coughing. Even play is careful. Touch is measured. Life has become an intricate choreography of caution, shaped by fear, yet also by necessity. And yet, even amidst this vigilance, humanity continues to assert life. Festivals return, though they carry a sharp edge of awareness. Music and dance are louder, more extravagant, as if life itself must declare defiance in the face of constant threat. Weddings, births, and other celebrations occur with urgency, a reflection of the collective understanding that the future is never guaranteed. People have learned to cling to joy, to love, and to connection, even as mortality hovers near, unseen but palpably present. Humor takes on a darker, sharper edge. Jokes about death, disease, and decay are common, not out of malice, but as a coping mechanism, a way to wrest control over something that feels otherwise uncontrollable. Life, once leisurely and long planned, is now urgent, immediate, and intensely felt. Intellectual life begins to stir in new ways, influenced directly by repeated outbreaks. Universities grow, attracting students who are eager not just to memorize old texts, but to understand patterns and observe outcomes. Physicians record cases meticulously, noting symptoms, duration, and outcomes. They begin to compare outbreaks across towns, regions, and even countries. Letters and treatises circulate more widely than ever before, carrying observations that cross borders, and slowly, painfully, forming a network of knowledge that is collective rather than isolated. Some physicians cling to old teachings, stubbornly defending outdated theories about humors or divine punishment. Others, younger and braver, rely on observation and logic, even if they cannot fully explain what they see. Dissections of corpses, once unthinkable, are conducted secretly, and while they yield no immediate cure, They mark the first steps toward a scientific understanding of the human body. Trial, error, and meticulous observation begin to challenge superstition, creating a fragile foundation for the medical revolutions yet to come. Social hierarchies shift dramatically under the persistent influence of the plague. Labor shortages give peasants and skilled workers leverage that would have been unimaginable only a generation earlier. Wages rise, mobility increases. Landowners are forced to adapt or lose everything. Traditional feudal structures, which had relied on the predictability of human labor, are weakened permanently. Peasants can demand conditions. Skilled artisans can negotiate mobility. Entire villages migrate, leaving some regions depopulated and others to rebuild with new dynamics. Women, too, find opportunities in this reshaped social landscape. Widows run estates. Daughters inherit property. Some take on the roles of healers, managing households and communities in ways that command quiet authority. Though historical records often overlook their influence, the reality on the ground is undeniable. Women's presence and power within families, trades, and local governance grow measurably, creating subtle yet lasting shifts in gender dynamics. Culture and art, shaped by trauma, evolve in a way that is both raw and enduring. Pain, death, and grief permeate paintings, sculpture, and literature. Artists depict the fragility of human life with a starkness previously avoided. Musicians compose works that mourn, yet defy despair. Literature turns inward, exploring the human psyche, emotions, and contradictions more deeply than before. Tales of heroism, survival, cruelty, and moral conflict become central themes. Humor, even when morbid, becomes a lens through which people confront mortality. In every brushstroke, every melody, every written word, the imprint of the Black Death is visible. It has transformed not only what humans fear, but how they express, document, and interpret that fear. Religion continues to experience profound upheaval. The Church, while still immensely powerful, faces challenges to its authority. Some clergy are criticized for wealth and corruption, others for failing to protect their communities. Personal faith becomes more important than institutional devotion. People seek direct connection to God, interpreting signs and events for themselves, sometimes forming new spiritual movements or cults that promise protection or enlightenment. Pilgrimages, prayers, and rituals persist, but their meaning evolves. Religion becomes a tool for solace, a framework for understanding, and sometimes a lens through which the inequities exposed by the plague are examined. Moral dilemmas become urgent and unavoidable. To care for the sick or to protect the healthy, to prioritize survival or maintain ethical codes. Communities are forced to confront questions with no clear answers, and these dilemmas embed themselves into cultural consciousness, Politics, too, is irrevocably transformed. Leaders understand that authority is inseparable from protection. Cities that manage outbreaks effectively earn loyalty. Those that fail provoke rebellion. Disease becomes an invisible but powerful political actor. Borders shift not only due to conquest, but due to depopulation and migration. Trade routes are altered. Cities rise or fall in prominence, depending on how they weather outbreaks. Monarchs, governors, and city councils are judged not merely by their conquests, but by their ability to safeguard lives. The Black Death teaches rulers that legitimacy is fragile and must be earned through action, foresight, and sometimes ruthlessness. Psychologically, humanity carries scars that endure across generations. Survivors develop heightened awareness, caution, and in some cases, obsession with health and cleanliness. Trauma manifests as fear, anxiety, and emotional intensity, shaping behavior in ways both subtle and dramatic. Communities balance compassion with cruelty, learning to protect the many sometimes at the expense of the few. The plague cultivates resilience, but also a permanent wariness. Individuals act decisively, often with urgency, understanding that in a single day, life can shift irreversibly. By now, the Black Death has become a teacher as much as it is a destroyer. It teaches humility, observation, resilience, and adaptability. It forces humans to confront the fragility of civilization, the unpredictability of nature, and the preciousness of every moment. It inspires inquiry, reshapes society, and cultivates both fear and courage. Knowledge becomes a weapon against uncertainty, observation a necessity, and action a moral imperative. Even as the plague's most devastating waves fade, its lessons echo across centuries, laying the groundwork for medicine, public health, social restructuring, and scientific thought. The world that emerges is scarred, wary, and transformed. Death no longer reigns unchallenged. Humanity, shaped by repeated tragedy, begins to understand that survival is not mere luck. It is observation, preparation, and action. The Black Death, in destroying so much, forces the living to rebuild, rethink, and reimagine society. Every policy, every law, every cultural practice, and every act of human ingenuity carries the imprint of its devastation. Life, though fragile and fleeting, is now approached with an intensity born of witnessing near-total annihilation. And so, as the medieval era gives way to the early modern world, the Black Death remains both a shadow and a guide. It has taught humanity about vulnerability and power, suffering and resilience, fear and hope. It has left a permanent mark not only on population numbers, but on human consciousness itself. Cities, families, governments, and individuals carry forward its lessons, aware that death is never distant, yet confident that knowledge, observation, and action can carve out spaces for life, even in a world that is never entirely safe. In this delicate balance between fragility and survival, between memory and innovation, the story of the Black Death continues, a silent force shaping generations long after the last fever has passed, ensuring that humanity is never the same again. The plague, relentless and unforgiving, has become a teacher whose lessons are written not just in texts or chronicles, but in the very structure of society, the architecture of cities, the practice of medicine, the flow of trade, the evolution of culture, and the hearts and minds of all who survived. And as humanity steps into the Renaissance, into exploration, science, and artistry, the whispers of the Black Death are still present, a reminder that life is precious, that knowledge is essential, and that survival is both an art and a responsibility passed down through every generation. The story, though centuries old, is far from over. It lives in memory, in habit, in culture, and in ebb as the 16th century unfolds. The world that emerged from the Black Death is no longer the same. The plague, once an abrupt and merciless visitor, has become a lingering presence in memory, shaping generations, even centuries, after its first devastating waves. People live with a dual consciousness. They know life is beautiful, fleeting, and fragile. Yet they also understand that death is always closer than it appears. Entire societies carry this awareness in their structures, laws, and culture. Streets are cleaner, towns more organized, and cities more cautious. Yet beneath the apparent order is a quiet tension, a hum of collective memory that reminds every individual that catastrophe can strike suddenly. Life in cities is markedly different from the pre-plague era. Markets thrive, but merchants have learned patience and vigilance. Stalls are more spaced, sanitation is observed, and travelers are scrutinized. Every shipment of grain, every barrel of water, every stray animal is treated as a potential threat. Fear has made people meticulous, and this meticulousness, ironically, allows trade to continue and economies to recover. Homes, too, are adapted to minimize risk. Families segregate spaces for cooking, sleeping, and care for the sick. Children are raised with constant reminders to observe and avoid danger. Parents warn them of symptoms to watch, practices to follow, and behaviors that could preserve life. Childhood innocence, once taken for granted, now carries responsibility. To survive is a collective effort, and every member of the household participates. Yet, human resilience is unmistakable. Festivals, marriages, and births continue with remarkable intensity. People laugh more fiercely, celebrate more loudly, and cling to love with an urgency that did not exist before. Art and literature reflect this duality. They depict grief, suffering, and death with unflinching honesty. But but they also celebrate survival, hope, and the stubborn beauty of human life. Artists create works where skeletons dance alongside the living. Musicians compose melodies that mourn yet uplift. And writers explore emotions that were once considered private or trivial. Humor becomes a way to claim control over fear. Even morbid jokes about death circulate freely, allowing communities to confront the inevitability of loss while still asserting their humanity. Education, science, and medicine begin to shift more perceptibly. Universities grow as centers not only for faith and philosophy, but for observation and experimentation. Physicians take meticulous notes on symptoms, durations, and outcomes of diseases. Letters and treatises carry knowledge across borders, slowly forming networks of understanding. The idea that observation might trump tradition takes root, challenging the long-held authority of ancient texts and superstitions. Dissections, once taboo, are performed cautiously, revealing the inner workings of the human body, while cures are still rudimentary. The accumulation of empirical knowledge represents a turning point. Humanity begins to realize that death can be studied, understood, and perhaps eventually controlled. Social hierarchies continue to transform. Labor shortages, a direct consequence of repeated outbreaks, empower peasants and skilled workers. Wages rise, mobility increases, and traditional feudal structures are destabilized. Landowners adapt, some with innovation, others with coercion, while workers gain new leverage in negotiating terms and conditions. Women's roles expand further. Widows manage estates, daughters inherit property, and women increasingly serve as healers, caretakers, and record keepers. Though formal records often neglect their contributions, the lived reality is undeniable. Women's influence in households, communities, and local economies grows substantially, reshaping gender dynamics in ways that will resonate for generations. Religion undergoes profound evolution under the weight of collective memory. The Church, once an unquestioned authority, faces scrutiny for failures during outbreaks, while individuals begin seeking personal connections to faith. Pilgrimages, rituals, and prayers remain important, but interpretation becomes more personal and sometimes more critical. Alternative spiritual movements emerge, offering protection, insight, or explanations outside formal doctrine. Moral dilemmas, whether to protect the healthy or care for the sick, whether to follow tradition or act pragmatically, shape communities' spiritual lives. These questions do not disappear once the plague wanes. They are integrated into the moral fabric of society. Politically, rulers learn that authority is inseparable from protection. Cities and kingdoms that respond decisively to outbreaks earn loyalty and stability. Those that fail face unrest, rebellion, or decline. Disease becomes an invisible actor in diplomacy, strategy, and governance. Borders are not only defined by conquest, but by demographic shifts caused by illness and migration. Trade routes, population centers, and economic hubs rise and fall according to how well societies manage repeated outbreaks. Power itself becomes intertwined with the ability to safeguard citizens. A lesson learned in blood and terror that will influence governance for centuries. Psychologically, humanity carries the trauma of the plague into every decision, action, and relationship. Survivors develop heightened awareness, cautious behavior, and an acute sense of mortality. Communities balance compassion and pragmatism, protecting the many sometimes at the cost of the few. Emotional intensity becomes a hallmark of social life. People love more fiercely, grieve more openly, and celebrate survival with fervor. Even as centuries pass, the imprint of trauma shapes cultural norms, social expectations, and personal behavior. Economically, the Black Death has left an enduring legacy. Labor scarcity forces innovation in agriculture, trade, and production. Wages rise, technology advances, and new forms of commerce emerge. Trade networks expand across regions and even continents. As merchants learn to anticipate risk, regulate supply, and preserve wealth against the threat of disease, the plague indirectly accelerates economic modernization, teaching societies that planning, observation, and adaptation are not optional, they are essential. By now, the Black Death is no longer simply a series of outbreaks. It has become a lens through which humanity understands itself. It teaches humility, resilience, observation, and foresight. It forces a reckoning with mortality, authority, and morality. Societies learn that survival is not just a matter of prayer or fate, but of knowledge, preparation, and collective effort. Cities, families, governments, and communities all carry forward lessons learned in the crucible of repeated catastrophe. As Europe edges further into the Renaissance, the influence of the plague continues to ripple outward. Science, art, literature, and governance all bear its mark. Knowledge, once confined to faith or tradition, now seeks evidence. Curiosity is cultivated by necessity. Humanity, scarred yet defiant, begins to explore the natural world, medical principles, and human behavior with a rigor born of survival. Fear remains, but it no longer paralyses, it guides, motivates, and shapes action. The Black Death, in its devastation, has created a world that is more vigilant, more intelligent, and more capable of transformation. And yet, the shadow of the plague never fully disappears. Small outbreaks continue, reminding communities that life is fragile. Every cough, fever, or sudden death carries the memory of history. Even as knowledge grows, the fear instilled by centuries of devastation persists, shaping behavior, policy, and culture. Humanity, has learned to coexist with uncertainty, to anticipate catastrophe, and to value life with an intensity previously unimaginable. In the end, the Black Death's true legacy is not measured merely in the millions who died, but in the societies, cultures, and human consciousness it reshaped. It teaches that survival is both fragile and remarkable, that knowledge is a weapon against terror, and that humanity's ability to endure, adapt, and innovate is forged in the crucible of unimaginable suffering. It has left a world more cautious, more observant, and more alive, not simply in body, but in mind and spirit. The plague has become both a shadow and a guide, shaping the contours of civilization long after the last fever has passed, ensuring that humanity's story will forever be intertwined with the lessons of loss, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of understanding. The Black Death, once a sudden, incomprehensible horror, has evolved into a force that defines the rhythm of life itself, teaching, shaping, and whispering reminders that life is precious, fragile, and worth every measure of vigilance and courage. And in this understanding, humanity stands, scarred yet unbowed, prepared to face the uncertainties of the world with knowledge, creativity, and a profound awareness of its own vulnerability. The story continues, carried in memory, habit, culture, and consciousness, echoing through every human generation as a reminder that survival is both a burden and a triumph, and that even in the face of overwhelming devastation, life persists, and sometimes, in surviving, transforms everything it touches. By the early 17th century, the echoes of the Black Death still resonate across Europe, North Africa, and parts of Asia, though the great waves that once swept through the continent have long since receded. The plague continues to make sporadic appearances, smaller but no less terrifying. Towns brace themselves at the first signs of illness. Merchants and travelers fear roads and ports. Families carry the memory of loss like a silent inheritance, each generation shaped by the trauma of what came before. The lessons of survival, of vigilance, of observation have become ingrained. Humanity has learned to coexist with the unseen, to anticipate catastrophe even in the absence of immediate threat. And yet, for all this preparation, each outbreak is still capable of instilling terror, reminding people that the plague is not merely a historical event, but a persistent reality, a shadow stretching across decades, centuries, and countless lives. Cities, now larger and more densely populated than in the 14th century, operate under rules born of necessity. Officials inspect markets, waterways, and homes. Quarantine laws, first enforced in the mid-1300s, have evolved into complex systems of containment, sometimes brutal, sometimes effective. Entire neighborhoods can be cordoned off, their inhabitants isolated for weeks or months. often without clear end. Watchmen patrol streets. Carts carry the sick and dying away. And families adjust to the absence of loved ones with grim pragmatism. Social order relies not only on authority, but on the collective adherence to rules designed to protect the many. Humanity has become, in a sense, a society of watchers and protectors, conditioned by centuries of repeated exposure to fear and loss. Life within these quarantine zones is intense, intimate, and often unbearable. Families live in close confinement, each cough or groan amplified, each fever a harbinger of potential death. Time slows. Days stretch endlessly as individuals count hours by routine meals, prayer, work, and listening for the sound of passing footsteps outside. The healthy live in constant vigilance, attending to the sick while fearing contamination themselves. Those who die do so quietly, often removed swiftly, their absence marked by an empty chair or an abandoned room. Survivors bear the emotional weight of every death, learning to move forward while carrying trauma that is invisible but unrelenting. Outside the quarantined walls, cities continue to function, though with caution. Markets, streets, and trade routes are monitored closely. Merchants adapt by staggering deliveries, rotating vendors, and observing strict hygiene protocols. Wealth and resources shift frequently, creating opportunities for some and devastation for others. Labor shortages, a direct consequence of recurring outbreaks, continue to alter the balance of power. Peasants and skilled workers maintain bargaining power. Towns and cities that manage outbreaks effectively thrive, while those that fail fall into decline. Social mobility, once constrained, now becomes a survival mechanism, allowing communities and individuals to adapt in ways that would have been unimaginable in pre-plague Europe. The intellectual and scientific landscapes continue to evolve. Physicians, apothecaries, and scholars refine observational techniques, recording symptoms, transmission patterns, and outcomes with increasing rigor. Dissections and anatomical studies become more common, leading to a deeper, albeit incomplete, understanding of the human body. Treatises and letters circulate across regions, forming networks of shared knowledge that bridge borders and languages. The plague has forced a shift. Observation and evidence begin to challenge tradition and superstition. Knowledge becomes a weapon against uncertainty. Doctors still make mistakes, and cures are often ineffective. But the practice of questioning, testing, and documenting marks the beginnings of a new scientific approach. Art, literature, and culture continue to bear the imprint of repeated trauma. Paintings depict death not just as an abstract concept, but as a tangible, inevitable force. Writers explore moral ambiguity, human suffering, and survival with a depth previously rare in literature. Music reflects sorrow, resilience, and defiance simultaneously. Humor, dark and morbid, serves as both coping mechanism and social commentary. In every cultural expression, the Black Death's legacy is evident. Humanity has become acutely aware of its mortality, and it seeks to express that awareness through creation, reflection, and communal memory. Religion remains a powerful, though increasingly complex, force. The Church retains authority, but its power is balanced by criticism, skepticism, and personal faith. Alternative spiritual movements arise, offering protection, explanation, or solace outside official doctrine. Pilgrimages, prayers, and rituals persist. Yet individuals interpret faith with greater personal agency. Moral and ethical questions: who to care for, how to survive, and how to act under duress, remain central to religious thought. Communities navigate these dilemmas with varying success, sometimes demonstrating profound compassion, sometimes enacting harsh pragmatism. The spiritual landscape reflects humanity's ongoing struggle to reconcile fear, survival, and morality in a world shaped by repeated catastrophe. Politically, the lessons of the plague continue to shape governance. Leaders recognize that survival is inseparable from authority. Those who act decisively during outbreaks gain loyalty. Those who fail face unrest, rebellion, and loss of legitimacy. Trade, population centers, and economic hubs shift according to disease patterns, forcing rulers to balance strategy, defense, and humanitarian need. Borders and alliances are influenced not only by conquest, but by demographic change. The Black Death has taught rulers that governance is inseparable from protection, and that authority is earned as much through care as through power. Psychologically, humanity bears the enduring scars of repeated plague exposure. Trauma persists across generations, shaping behavior, relationships, and cultural norms. Survivors act with caution, awareness, and often obsession with health. Communities balance care for the many with pragmatic decisions that may exclude the few. Emotional intensity defines social life. Love is more fervent, grief more acute, and celebrations more urgent. The Black Death has imprinted a permanent consciousness of mortality into human culture, influencing every aspect of life, from personal relationships to public policy. Economically, the plague has left deep, lasting changes. Labor scarcity drives innovation in agriculture, trade, and craft. Wages rise and stabilize at higher levels than before the plague. Trade networks expand, and societies learn to anticipate risk, preserve resources, and adapt to sudden disruptions. This newfound economic resilience, born from repeated catastrophe, lays the groundwork for future prosperity, technological advancement, and social transformation. The Black Death, though destructive, becomes an unexpected catalyst for progress in multiple dimensions of human life. By this point, the Black Death is no longer an event. It is a shaping force, a lens through which humanity views mortality, survival, and civilization itself. It has forced societies to observe, adapt, and innovate. It has reshaped power dynamics, gender roles, labor systems, and family structures. It has influenced culture, spirituality, and governance. Every generation that survives carries the lessons of the past, embedding them in behavior, law, and collective memory. Knowledge, observation, and preparedness are recognized as essential tools against uncertainty, and humanity begins to understand that survival is both a skill and a moral responsibility. The plague's legacy is measured not only in lives lost, but in how it has transformed the living. Life is approached with urgency, thought, and vigilance. Knowledge is pursued to mitigate risk. Communities and governments plan, anticipate, and adapt. Art, literature, and religion are infused with awareness of fragility and mortality. Economic systems are restructured. Social hierarchies are fluid. The Black Death has, in effect, reshaped civilization itself. And as Europe moves toward the age of exploration, discovery, and scientific revolution, the lessons of the plague remain a constant undercurrent. Humanity has learned that death is inevitable, but not absolute. That fear can drive both caution and innovation, and that survival is a collective, as well as individual, endeavor. The Black Death has become both a shadow and a teacher, guiding humanity in subtle ways long after the worst has passed, ensuring that memory, vigilance, and resilience are permanently etched into the human experience. The story of the Black Death continues to unfold, not merely as history, but as a living legacy shaping thought, behavior, and civilization itself, echoing through generations as a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable devastation, humanity adapts, survives, and transforms. By the late 17th century, the Black Death has long ceased to be the unstoppable wave of destruction that it was in the mid-14th century. Yet, its presence remains in every facet of life. The devastation it wrought is no longer immediate, but its lessons, scars, and stories have been imprinted across generations. Cities once emptied by the swift and invisible hand of disease have grown again, rebuilt with caution, resilience, and vigilance. Streets are better organized, marketplaces cleaner, and quarantine measures, though no longer shocking in their severity, are understood as necessary tools of survival. Communities operate with a collective memory of death, loss, and resilience. Even in times of health and prosperity, that memory hums quietly beneath daily life, guiding behavior, policy, and culture. In homes, families live with the echoes of trauma deeply embedded in their routines. Meals are prepared with care. Water is filtered and stored meticulously. And children are raised to recognize the signs of illness and the rules of safety. Parents teach them not only to survive, but to live intentionally, aware that life is fragile, fleeting, and not guaranteed. In these households, survival is a shared responsibility, a constant negotiation between care, vigilance, and caution. Yet, amidst this vigilance, life persists. Laughter and celebration have returned with intensity, but they are tinged with awareness. Weddings, births, and festivals are both joyous and urgent, a testament to the human desire to cling to life and its pleasures, even as mortality remains an ever-present shadow. The intellectual world, shaped and provoked by centuries of plague, continues its evolution. Universities, once temples of classical knowledge, now serve as laboratories of observation and inquiry. Physicians record diseases meticulously, comparing outbreaks across regions, studying symptoms, and experimenting cautiously with remedies. Dissections and autopsies, though still controversial, are more common, gradually expanding the understanding of human anatomy. Treatises and letters circulate widely, forming networks of shared knowledge that bridge cities, countries, and even continents. Observation begins to outweigh blind adherence to tradition. Knowledge, once a passive inheritance, becomes an active tool against uncertainty, a weapon against fear, and a beacon of hope that humanity might someday predict, control, or mitigate the horrors of disease. Society itself bears the imprint of centuries of loss. Labor shortages have permanently shifted power dynamics. Peasants and skilled workers retain unprecedented leverage, negotiating wages and mobility that would have been impossible before the plague. Women, too, continue to find opportunities in the transformed social landscape. Widows manage estates, daughters inherit property, and women increasingly act as healers, teachers, and community leaders. The social structures of Europe, once rigidly hierarchical, have become more fluid, adaptive, and resilient. Communities recognize the importance of cooperation, preparedness, and foresight, and they embed these lessons into governance, family life, and trade. Culturally, the impact of the Black Death is profound and enduring. Art reflects the intimate knowledge of mortality. Paintings depict the dance of life and death with unprecedented honesty. Literature explores grief, ethical dilemmas, and survival in rich and complex ways. Music channels sorrow, resilience, and defiance simultaneously. Even humor is tempered by awareness of fragility, often dark, ironic, or morbid, reflecting humanity's attempt to assert control over fear through expression. Every cultural artifact carries the imprint of trauma and the drive to endure, making creativity both a mirror of human suffering and a testament to its persistence. Religion, though still central, is nuanced in its authority. church maintains power, but no longer dominates unquestioned. Individual faith, interpretation, and spiritual agency flourish alongside organized religion. Alternative movements and local practices coexist with orthodox belief, offering protection, insight, or comfort outside official doctrine. Communities wrestle with moral questions daily. To protect the healthy or care for the sick, to adhere to tradition or innovate pragmatically. These dilemmas are part of the fabric of life, shaping not only spirituality, but also ethics, governance, and social cohesion. Political structures, too, have been transformed. Leaders understand that authority is inseparable from protection. The ability to maintain health and safety is now recognized as essential to governance. Cities and kingdoms that manage outbreaks efficiently maintain loyalty and stability. Those that fail risk unrest, rebellion, or decline. Trade, population centers, and economic hubs shift according to the effectiveness of public health measures. Borders and alliances are influenced not only by conquest, but by demographic change. The Black Death has transformed the very nature of power, showing that leadership is inseparable from the ability to safeguard life. Psychologically, humans carry forward trauma and resilience in equal measure. Generations bear the imprint of loss, shaping behavior, relationships, and social norms. Communities develop a collective awareness of mortality that influences every action. Who to trust, how to interact, and how to prepare for uncertainty. Emotional intensity pervades social life. Grief is public. Joy is urgent, and love is claimed with fervor. The plague has created a culture of cautious attentiveness, one in which survival is both a practical skill and a deeply moral endeavor. Economically, societies have adapted in remarkable ways. Scarcity and disruption have spurred innovation in agriculture, trade, and craft. Wages have stabilized at higher levels than before. Trade networks have expanded, and communities have learned to anticipate and mitigate risk. These lessons, born from catastrophe, form the basis of new economic resilience. The Black Death, despite its destruction, indirectly catalyzes growth, technological advancement, and social transformation, demonstrating that even devastation can carry the seeds of renewal. By this stage, the Black Death is no longer merely a historical event. It is a shaping force, a teacher, and a lens through which humanity understands life, death, and civilization itself. It has forced humans to observe, adapt, and innovate, reshaping social hierarchies, gender roles, economies, and family structures. Knowledge, vigilance, and preparedness are not optional. They are essential to survival. Civilization itself has been molded by centuries of experience with plague, creating a society more attentive, more resilient, and more capable of confronting uncertainty. even as Europe edges fully into the age of scientific inquiry, exploration, and cultural flourishing. The Black Death's lessons remain embedded. Every city, household, and institution carries its imprint. Death, once sudden and incomprehensible, is now acknowledged as a constant companion whose presence informs behavior, policy, and thought. Humanity has learned that survival is not a matter of luck alone, but of knowledge, observation, and coordinated action. Art, literature, governance, and even daily life are all influenced by this shared awareness of mortality and resilience. The plague's legacy endures not simply in historical records or population statistics, but in the consciousness of every human generation that has lived in its shadow. Life is approached with vigilance, intention, and a profound understanding of fragility. Communities act collectively. Individuals observe relentlessly, and societies innovate continuously, all in response to a force that once seemed uncontrollable. Humanity, scarred yet unbowed, has learned to balance fear with courage, grief with celebration, and mortality with a relentless drive to survive and thrive. And so, as the world moves toward the 18th century, the Black Death stands not merely as a memory, but as a teacher of profound lessons. That life is precious, knowledge is essential, and survival demands both vigilance and creativity. Its shadow continues to shape every heartbeat, every choice, and every human endeavor, reminding the living that even in the face of devastation, humanity has the capacity not only to endure, but to transform, rebuild, and grow. As the 18th century dawns, the Black Death has receded into history as a force of destruction. Yet, its presence continues to echo across every layer of human life. Its devastation, so sudden and merciless in the 14th century, has long since ended, but the lessons it instilled remain alive, shaping society, culture, and consciousness alike. The memory of unimaginable suffering, of families torn apart, towns emptied, and entire generations lost, has been seared into collective memory. Humanity carries this history not only in chronicles, records, and architecture, but in behaviors, habits, and ways of thinking. Every city, village, and household bears evidence of a world reshaped by plague. A world where vigilance, observation, and preparation are the invisible currency of survival. In towns and cities, life has become a careful balance between ambition and caution. Markets bustle, but hygiene is observed more rigorously than ever before. Streets are cleaner, hospitals more organized, and public health policies, once shocking in their rigor, are now embedded into governance. Travel is approached cautiously. Merchants and traders carry not only goods, but the hard-earned wisdom of centuries of disease. Understanding that commerce can be both a lifeline and a vector of catastrophe, families families live with the lessons of history ever present. Kitchens are clean, water is filtered, and spaces are organized to minimize risk. Children are raised with awareness of illness, hygiene, and the importance of observation. Life is lived consciously, every choice carrying the implicit knowledge that mortality is close, fragile, and inevitable. Despite this constant awareness of fragility, humanity continues to assert life with a remarkable intensity. Festivals, marriages, and births are celebrated with urgency and grandeur. Music, art, and literature thrive, but they carry the mark of repeated trauma. Paintings depict the beauty and brevity of life, sometimes juxtaposed with reminders of death. Writers explore morality, survival, and grief with nuance, revealing the ethical dilemmas that plague forces upon every society. Musicians compose works that mourn, but also defy despair, reminding communities that joy and sorrow exist together. Humor, often dark and morbid, allows people to wrest control over fear and find moments of defiance in a world that has so often been unpredictable. Intellectually, the Black Death has catalyzed a profound transformation. Universities and scholars increasingly prioritize observation, documentation, and experimentation over blind adherence to tradition. Physicians, building upon centuries of meticulous records, slowly refine treatments and understanding of disease. Autopsies, once forbidden, provide insights into the human body. Letters, treatises, and records circulate widely, forming networks of shared knowledge that cross borders and languages. The plague has forced humans to recognize the value of evidence, of careful observation, and of learning from experience. Knowledge becomes both a shield and a weapon, a way to anticipate and mitigate threats that once seemed unstoppable. Socially, labor shortages caused by repeated outbreaks have permanently shifted the balance of power. Peasants, artisans, and skilled workers maintain unprecedented leverage, while women's roles in society have expanded dramatically. Widows manage estates, daughters inherit property, and women increasingly occupy positions of authority within households and communities. Traditional hierarchies have been softened, made more fluid, and human mobility has increased. Communities that adapt, that work together, and that value knowledge and preparation thrive, while rigid or complacent societies struggle. The Black Death, in destroying so much, has also given humanity a rare opportunity to rebuild with flexibility, resilience, and foresight. Religion, too, has been transformed. While the Church remains powerful, individual faith and personal spiritual interpretation have grown. Alternative movements offer protection, guidance, and comfort outside formal doctrine. Pilgrimages, prayers, and rituals persist, but moral and ethical questions are more central than ever. Who deserves care? How should communities respond to scarcity? How can life be protected without compromising survival? These questions, once theoretical, are lived daily. The Black Death has forced humans to confront ethical dilemmas in stark, unavoidable terms, embedding them permanently in societal consciousness. Politically, leaders have learned that authority is inseparable from protection. Cities, kingdoms, and empires that respond decisively to outbreaks earn loyalty and stability. Those that fail face unrest and decline. Borders and trade networks are influenced not only by conquest, but by demographic shifts and public health decisions. Governance has evolved from a focus on wealth and conquest alone to one that emphasizes safety, foresight, and the collective well-being of populations. The plague has taught rulers that survival is a currency of power, as essential as armies or alliances. Psychologically, the shadow of the Black Death endures. Generations bear trauma that shapes decisions, behavior, and culture. Communities develop a profound awareness of mortality. Emotional intensity defines life. Grief is public. Joy is urgent. Love is claimed with immediacy. The constant knowledge of fragility fosters resilience. Humanity learns to hold hope tightly, to live with intensity, and to approach every day with vigilance and intention. Economically, the world is more resilient than before. Labor scarcity has spurred innovation. Wages are higher, trade networks more complex, and societies have learned to plan for disruption. Economic systems are not just about growth, but about adaptability. The Black Death, though a force of immense destruction, indirectly drives progress, creating structures, networks, and practices that will enable future civilizations to flourish. In the end, the Black Death's true legacy is not measured solely in the millions who perished, but in the ways humanity survived, adapted, and transformed. It has reshaped every aspect of life: family, labor, governance, culture, art, religion, and knowledge. It has instilled vigilance, observation, resilience, and the urgency of life itself. Humanity, scarred and tested, emerges with a consciousness tempered by trauma, but sharpened by experience. Knowledge, preparation, and adaptability have become essential to survival, and these lessons endure through centuries, guiding every heartbeat, decision, and generation. The plague, once a sudden, incomprehensible horror, has become a silent teacher, a shadow, and a guide. It has reminded humanity of fragility, mortality, and the preciousness of life. It has shown the importance of observation, preparation, and collective action. It has sculpted societies, cultures, and civilizations, leaving a permanent mark on every facet of human existence. The lessons of the Black Death echo not only in history, but in the way people live, think, and build the future. And so, the story ends not with closure, but with understanding. The Black Death may no longer sweep across continents, but it lives in memory, in consciousness, and in the structures of a world forever changed. It has transformed humanity, teaching that survival is both fragile and extraordinary, that knowledge is power, and that even in the face of overwhelming devastation, life persists, adapts, and ultimately endures. The shadow remains, a quiet reminder of mortality, resilience, and the unyielding drive to survive and thrive, echoing through centuries, whispering that even after devastation, humanity can rise, rebuild, and carry forward a world that has learned the deepest truths about life and death. The Black Death, though centuries passed, continues to shape every heartbeat, every choice, and every generation, its lessons eternal, its memory unbroken, its legacy immortal.